Hello everybody, welcome back to another solo new bat-chatted adventure. I'm here running by myself again. Captain Logan and I have both been really busy, and we promised to get back to our regularly scheduled bat chats as soon as possible. In the meantime, I am trying to fill in the gap and making as many of these as possible just to make sure people still get bat chat videos. So I talked last time about writing Jason Todd. And before that I talked about writing Bruce Wayne, and there is a lot of discussion in both of those videos, as well as the one before that about the I'm Batman problem, in regards to versions of Batman, a historical precedent for what Batman is supposed to be like, what the definitive version of that character is, versus what you grew up with, where your allegiances lie as far as who Batman ought to be. And I want to talk about that for a second. I don't know how long this video is ultimately going to end up being, but I did want to talk about, just for a little while, the idea of your Batman or my Batman, something like along those lines. Not necessarily what definitive Batman is, I think that's its own separate topic, but the idea of people having a version of the character that is theirs, and specifically about Batman, because that's its own topic in general. But I think it's unique with Batman, and I think people come at it from lots of different angles, and we just don't necessarily discuss it on those terms, because in the age I grew up in the time from when I was a kid up to now, most people I talk to, and some people a little bit older than me, some people a little bit younger than me, their definitive Batman, their version of Batman is animated series. I know lots of people older that have been reading comics for ages came to a point where they said, okay, animated series Batman's for me. If you're younger than I am, then your version of Batman is probably the Batman from the Kids WB show. If you're older, then if you're a lot older or a lot younger, there's a weird standard deviation here, but if you're a lot older or a lot younger, then it might be 60s Batman or Brave and the Bold Batman. All shows that ran for long enough to enculturate people into a specific version of Batman. Animated series, I think, sticks around longer, not because of its quality, because I do have my issues with that show. I do think it's the weakest Batman show, believe it or not. But I think that sticks around more because of the DC animated universe. That you had that show that ran for, I want to say 3 seasons, well, 3 volumes, and then Batman New Adventures, and then we had Superman, and then we had Justice League, we had Justice League Unlimited, we had Batman Beyond. Like, that characterization was around for so much longer. And so it's just natural to have that character in your mind for most people. I never really had that. People that are the same age as me, people that I've known, or people I used to know at least, ever since like elementary school, middle school and stuff, most people would tell me that their favorite version of Batman is animated series. Some people might go back and say Batman 89, and then some people later would tell me The Batman, but like more or less 90% of the time it is animated series, and I never had that experience. I think that's weird. I never had that, except for maybe, yeah, I think really only, I think except for Superman, I don't have any character that I would define as, well, this one thing is my version of that. Particularly with Batman, but in general, like, I can't point to one particular depiction of Captain America and say, yeah, that's my Captain America. I can't do that with Iron Man, I can't do that with Thor, I can't do that with, I'm blanking on other names. I can't do that with Robins. I can't do that with Nightwing. There's no, like, except for Superman and the Christopher Reeve movie, the Superman movie from 1978. Except for that movie and that depiction of Superman, I don't have anything where I say like this version is mine. And with Batman, it's a little bit stranger to have that because there's been so many incarnations, there have been so many adaptations. Batman is reinvented, well, not necessarily reinvented, but remarketed to us so often that it's completely natural and almost expected that you would have a version of that character that is personally connected to you. The version that you grew up with, the version that made you fall in love with that character, the version that is yours. And Batman and Dragon Ball Z, this is related, I promise. Batman and Dragon Ball Z are two things in my mind that I have never conceived of myself without. I remember being a kid and saying, I don't like Superman. I remember being a kid finding the exact moment where I found out, yeah, I like Superman. With all of my favorite comic book characters, with all of my favorite films, with all of my favorite franchises, with all of my favorite things in general, I can tell you precisely the moments where I'm like, okay, now I like this thing. And I don't have that with Dragon Ball Z, and I don't have that with Batman. There is no moment, there is no memory, no recollection anywhere where I say, like, oh man, that guy's Batman? I like it. Or that's Dragon Ball Z? I like it. Like, I don't have a first memory of those. And even more than that, with Batman, I grew up on animated series, but I also had the Burton movies with me. My dad used to get lots of comic books before I was born. Back when I was just my sister and my parents were going to have another kid, which would ended up being me. Back then, my dad would actively go out and find lots of comic books and get a great assortment of them. My dad wasn't sure what his next kid would be into, so he got a little bit of everything. He got sports stuff, he got movies, he got comics, he got video games, he got electronics, he got like history books, like anything imaginable that a person would be into, he got some element of. And in doing that, I always grew up having multiple versions of Batman. Like, I had Batman on film, I had Batman in 70s comics, 80s comics, and 90s comics, and if you know Batman history, that is quite the shift. And I had Batman in video games, I had Batman in like historical context. Like, I had this old book about like the history of everything. That's basically what it was. It was like a million facts of the history of everything, and there was a section there on Batman, just talking about him from 1939 onwards to about, I think that book was published in 80 something, so about to that point. So I always had a little bit of Batman everywhere, and I never latched onto one version over the other. My definition for calling something Batman is, does he wear a costume and call himself Batman? That's all it really takes. That's all it really takes for me to say that that's Batman. If you have a person that calls themselves Batman, they can be anything they want. It's a version of Batman because they call themselves Batman. And so I don't have this my version of the character. And I know a lot of people do, and I understand that mentality because I have it with Superman, but I don't have it with anything else. And with that mentality, I think a natural bias starts getting created, which is a fine bias. It's perfectly natural to have that one thing that appeals to your taste more than anything else. And I know most people are absolutely fine with saying, that's not my Batman, but it's still really, really good. Like, when the Nolan films came out, that was a lot of people's arguments of, like, that's not my Batman, but it's a really great movie. If you look at animated series, people say that's not my Batman, but it's still good. You look at The Batman, it's not my Batman, but it's still good. People are generous with that. People are very charitable in giving all the versions of Batman their due credence. But because Batman has been marketed so often, and because he's been around so often, it's very bizarre to me that so many people have latched onto just one version, and so many of them have latched onto very similar versions. Because I'm not different, really. I'm not really different from anyone else. Anyone of my age range should conceivably have been in a state where they were exposed to multiple versions of Batman. Whether it's on film, whether it's on video games, whether it's on TV, they would have been inundated with different versions. But they all still latched onto one, and they all still latched onto this version so emotionally to the point where that's their Batman. And every time I talk about my dream Batman run, every time I talk about myself writing Batman, and I talk about my thoughts on the character, it's never grounded in one thing. Like, I think 70s Batman comics are arguably the best era. I think Grant Morrison's Batman run is the best Batman run. But those two things are very different. And there's lots of weird moments where I can say, well, I think The Batman is much better than animated series. But animated series is really good too, and both of those characters are Batman to me. Like, I can't differentiate them, really. Like, I can talk about the superficial differences in characterization and such, but they're both Batman. And so, maybe I'm rambling a little bit too much about this, but it's very strange to me that the concept of having your Batman or my Batman has been so prevalent, because it's especially that character, right? Like, you don't see people going around talking about that's my Iron Man or that's my Captain America. You see it with a little bit with Daredevil, because there is a very clear divide between the fun-loving adventurer and the darker, gritty noir. You see it with Superman. You see it with most Marvel and DC characters. Most characters have enough versions of themselves to where you can conceivably say that people would latch onto this as their version. But Batman's the one where it always comes up. Every time there's a conversation about it, it's always Batman that's kind of the prime example. And a character that's been adapted as often as Batman, I think Batman's probably been adapted more than any other comic book character, or at least mainstream comic book character. As a character that's been adapted that often, how does that psychology develop? How do people get to this place where they have that? Because they're always being exposed to multiple versions. Even when The Batman was going on, you had the Nolan films coming out. The comics were doing a completely different thing. You had at least 3 versions of that character going on simultaneously that were all absolutely different from each other. And yet, people latch on to one, and they dominantly latch on to one. Most people latch on to the same versions in each given era. And I don't know where that comes from. And it's not always the most popular one either. You go back in history far enough, and people will say, like, this one writer of Batman is theirs most of the time, whether it's Dennis O'Neil or Frank Robbins or whoever the guy is that came before him. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's kind of late here, so names are slipping. So that's very strange to me. I don't know, am I alone in this? Are there other people that have this? Are there other people that don't understand having only one version of the character to latch onto? Are there other people that do have this, that do have their definitive Batman, and can explain to me where that came from for you? Like, I would love to know, particularly with people that became fans of Batman, what was that moment where you realized he was one of your favorite characters, or you liked him at all? I think that would actually be a great discussion. I would absolutely love to know, if you're a fan of Batman, how did you get there? If you're not a fan of Batman, how did you get there? And do you have a definitive version? Am I just kind of an outlier here where I can't conceive of one version over the other? Or are there other people like that? I'm not really sure, but thanks everybody for listening to me ramble on and on about this. I would love to get more discussion in the comments about whether it's just me or if it's other people, where people land on this issue. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.